My name is Joelys and I am known as AspergerWorld. I have one little example of this. Sometimes autistic children get very overloaded during school, and most people know this, but I want to know, do most people know that children with autism can get overloaded from flashbacks of sensory overloads? And when I say flashbacks, I mean that the past injustification and sensory overload isn't actually happening now, but it's something they experienced in the past, and in the present they are reminded of it somehow. So I have an example of this. Once looked after a little girl who was autistic, and her teachers couldn't understand how every time she would be in the classroom, she would refuse to do work because she would instead be screaming and clapping her hands over her ears and getting very frustrated and agitated. They couldn't understand why. To them, there was no sensory overload. There was no reason for her to behave this way. She was in a blank room and they couldn't understand it. So I went in and I looked at the sensory happenings. And I discovered that every time that she would get upset, she would be looking or holding a pen. Now, I know this sounds quite odd, but this pen represents a trauma from her past. And that trauma was the fact that she was unable to do something that she needed to do with that pen, and it was an unjustification to her. And I know this because previously I had observed her in the classroom, and she had been told that because she had done good behaviour, she was allowed to do some colouring in. So she went to the pens and she went to start colouring in, but the pen would not work. Now, to a child with autism, that isn't just a frustrating thing. That's an injustification, because it means that she is wrong. It means that because she hasn't always have the processing abilities to be able to understand that the pen not working has nothing to do with her. In her eyes, the pen not working actually means that she was wrong, and actually means that she didn't deserve the treat to be able to colour in. And that obviously felt so wrong, because she'd been trying so hard to do the right thing and be good, and she'd been promised that she could colour in and because she was a good girl. And when the pen didn't work, it brought on an overload of injustification. And it's important to remember that not all overloads are actually related to sensory or information. Some of them are just simply an injustification and trying to understand the world around us and understand what or how this injustification is happening. And part of autism is being so in need of the truth and all things that are correct and honest. And when an injustification happens, then it's terrifying for us as autistic people. And that injustification can include somehow feeling like we are actually wrong for doing something. So when this girl went into the classroom and she would be trying to work with a pen, she would refuse to do it by having an overload. And it's not like she was like choosing to refuse to do the work. She just couldn't do the work. It was too unjustified. She was terrified that unjustification would happen again. She was terrified that she would get judged to be wrong. She was terrified she'd get in trouble. She didn't know what to do, and the overload from the past affected her there and then, and she had a complete overload that turned into a meltdown. So once it became apparent what the issue was, that the issue was actually an overload from the past and the injustification from the past affecting her in the present, they realised that actually she isn't naughty, she isn't attention seeking, and actually there's something on their part that they need to do better to help her as an autistic child cope with the injustice from the past and work out how to make pens less traumatizing so she can actually work. I hear it all the time. Gosh, Jolie is so careless. She just doesn't look after her stuff. She's always losing her homework. She never seems to be bothered to write down her classwork in her planner. It's like she wants to fail at her work, and it's like she doesn't really care. Now, this is a quote I actually overheard from a teacher before I went in to meet her. I was stood outside the classroom about to knock on the door, the closed door, and I overheard her inside talking to the teacher assistant about me. I was due to go in and meet her to discuss my inability to write down work in my planner and try and come up with a solution. But overhearing them say that I was careless and that it's like I was trying to fail, it really, really hurt. The truth is, I wasn't attention seeking. I wasn't being careless. The truth is that there wasn't enough room in my brain to be able to process the information to write down the homework in my planner. I just couldn't do it. They'd always leave writing down homework right to the last minute of the lesson, usually about the time where the bell's ringing bell is ringing to signify the end of lesson. Everyone's packing away their stuff, the tables are in check. The chairs are creaking and squeaking as students are standing up. There's all of this noise and chatter, and that is the moment that I'm supposed to write down my homework. Well, even if I'd been told, I can't always tell that is what I need to do. I just haven't got the abilities. or the capabilities at that time of overload to work out that actually I do need to write down my work. And then even if I could work it out, I then can't work out what had happened during the lesson and work out what I need to write down in the planner to help me when I got home to do my homework. Any bits of paper that I got given, any homework I got given, would just get lost in my bag because I didn't have the capabilities to be able to look after them and make the connection to put them somewhere safe or remember where they are. And it wasn't my fault. I was too overloaded and having shut down of my abilities. But teachers don't understand that. And instead they labelled me as careless. Instead, I was labelled as careless. And because they viewed it as a fault of my own, they didn't really try and help me from the root of the problem, which was the overloads during the class. I would get judged as being stubborn because I couldn't process information and work to the best of my abilities outside of a very structured routine. And that meant that I got in trouble if I couldn't have that routine because I couldn't cope, and I'd run away and hide in the toilets, or I would just sit and be very quiet and completely unresponsive at the desk, and that would mean that I was judged as refusing to do work. And it's because I didn't have the routines in place to help me. One time during school, I had to go into extra math tutorials to help me try and gain improve my math skills, because maths was one of my worst subjects. And they came to me one lunchtime, completely unannounced, and they said, "Joey, we have a maths tutorial ready for you. It's the new maths teacher. She's very nice and she's waiting for you in the classroom. The other side of school, I'll take you there." And I panicked because it was outside of my routine. I panicked because it was outside of my routine and I couldn't cope. And I got judged to be careless and stubborn because I refused to go with them. And it wasn't by choice, I just couldn't cope with the mayhem of the change in my routine. And it astounds me that they didn't take this into account.